The Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Transportation Security will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on assessing the future of the Transportation Security Administration. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I would like to welcome everyone to today's hearing, and I am pleased to have Inspector General Roth back once again, and Administrator Neffinger again back here as well. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine TSA's challenges and identify what changes TSA needs to make in order to move forward in an effective manner. TSA was created out of a tragedy and was quickly stood up to address major security vulnerabilities that terrorists exploited. However, 14 years after 9/11, we now have an agency that has had many missteps in its efforts to keep the traveling public safe. Inspector General Roth, your office has conducted over 100 audits identifying major security vulnerabilities and organizational challenges throughout TSA, including the most recent reports that found that TSA passenger screening was allegedly wrong 96% of the time, and that 73 aviation workers have potential ties to terrorism. Of course, there's also the recent cases involving drug trafficking incidents in airports at Dallas-Fort Worth, Los Angeles International, and Oakland, to name a few, involving employees. These figures are startling and shatter the public confidence. I look forward to hearing from you today about what systemic problems you've identified and what needs to be done to help TSA address these challenges. What is most unfortunate is that these startling findings by both your office and the Government Accountability Office, as well as the FBI and other agencies, are not isolated instances. Many of these vulnerabilities have been identified and known for years, and unfortunately, prior to this year, the previous leadership within both TSA and DHS did not take the appropriate steps to address these known security vulnerabilities. The purpose of today's hearing is not to look backwards, however. With new leadership, Administrator Neffinger, you have an opportunity to address these challenges head-on and lead TSA in a different path, and I'm confident that you will do so. In our discussions, you've been frank, straightforward, and sincere, and I appreciate that. I have full confidence that you are tackling TSA's challenges with an open mind, and I look forward to hearing from you today about how we can work together to ensure TSA fulfills its critical mission. This subcommittee has worked tirelessly and in an overwhelmingly bipartisan manner to address the challenges that TSA faces. Since the start of this Congress, we have had 7 pieces of legislation pass the House, which is remarkable, out of this committee, and 2 of those bills are now public laws. However, there is no silver bullet to address all of the challenges that TSA faces, and unfortunately, we have to be right 100% of the time, and the terrorists have to be right just once. With nearly 2 million passengers being screened every day, we need to do more to better focus our efforts on those passengers that are unknown, while still taking precautions to protect against the insider threat. Currently, less than 5% of travelers participate in PreCheck. TSA needs to increase this population so that it can target its efforts and resources in a more risk-based manner. That is why I introduced H.R. 2843, the PreCheck Expansion Act. This bill will help TSA to take steps to effectively and robustly market the program and dramatically increase the enrollment. However, in addition to expanding PreCheck, TSA must look at what additional efforts are necessary to increase the security effectiveness of PreCheck and what measures are necessary to mitigate the insider threat. This week, the House passed H.R. 3102, the Airport Access Control Security Improvement Act of 2015. This legislation, which I introduced earlier this year, requires TSA to consult with federal and private sector partners to review existing employee screening protocols and work in a comprehensive manner to improve the effectiveness of access controls at airports across the United States. It's a major undertaking. We must do a better job at knowing more about the people who work and travel through our nation's airports. Securing our nation's transportation systems is of vital importance to both our national security and our economic strength and stability. In the 9/11 Commission report, the then head of the CIA, George Tenet, was quoted as saying, quote, "The system was blinking red," end quote, in the months leading up to 9/11. We cannot stand idly by and grant tacit approval to lax security measures when we have the authority, responsibility, and indeed the duty to spur action and keep the traveling public safe from harm. Inspector General Roth and Administrator Neffinger, this committee wants to support both of you in your efforts to reform TSA, and we look forward to hearing from you today. You are not on opposite sides of the fence. I view you both on the same side of the fence, one exposing the problems, and the other one making sure they get fixed. And that's why you're both here today. With that, I recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Rice, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening this hearing. I'd also like to thank the witnesses for being here today to discuss the need for and status of reforms and improvements within the TSA. Administrator Neffinger, I understand you had to adjust your schedule in order to testify before this subcommittee today, and I want to tell you how much we appreciate that. While you've only been in this position since June, you've demonstrated a true commitment to work constructively with us as you take on the challenges facing TSA, and I thank you for that. Finally, I want to thank Inspector General Roth for being here today and for the work you have done and continue to do to identify vulnerabilities within TSA and advise us on what we can do to enhance the security of our commercial aviation sector. Your most recent report, which is classified, concerns covert tests conducted by undercover DHS investigators who attempted to smuggle prohibited items, including weapons and mock explosives, past TSA airport security checkpoints. As we all know, the results of these covert tests were leaked to the media in June before the report was complete, and it was reported that in 67 out of 70 tests, TSA failed to detect these items and allowed the investigators to proceed past the checkpoint. 67 out of 70, that's 96% of the time. I think we can all agree that 96% is an alarming figure and one that we cannot overlook. We have to assess all of the findings and recommendations in your report. We have to shine a light on the vulnerabilities that these covert tests have exposed, and we have to take action to eliminate those vulnerabilities. We know that the threats to this country, particularly to our aviation sector, are constant. They are real. We know those threats are evolving and becoming more sophisticated, that the people who want to do us harm are always on the watch for a new way in, a new way to beat the system. That's why we have to be even more vigilant. That's why we conduct these tests, because we know that no matter how good our security might be, it can be better. It can always be better, and the findings in this report make it clear that it can and must be much better in order to match the threats that we face today. So I'm eager to hear about how our witnesses are working together to act on these findings, to implement reforms, and to close the gaps that these covert tests uncovered. Obviously, as we all know, Administrator Neffinger, you have only been in your position for a few months. Many of the topics and reports that Inspector General Roth has compiled predate your time at TSA, but I certainly look forward to hearing what TSA is doing in response to this most recent report, and if Inspector General Roth has previously identified other security gaps or vulnerabilities that TSA must still address. I would like to learn about those efforts as well. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for convening this hearing, and I look forward to productive dialogue today. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Rice. The chair now recognizes a ranking minority member of the full committee, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for any statement he may have.
Thank you very much, Chairman Katko and Ranking Member Rice, for holding today's hearing. I also welcome the Administrator and the Inspector General for their appearance also. Throughout this Congress, this committee has voiced its concern with the state of security within the commercial aviation sector. Over the span of recent years, both the Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office have compiled numerous reports that detail mismanagement, inefficiencies, and vulnerabilities within TSA. These reports range from vulnerabilities associated with granting expedited screening via the use of secure flight and managed inclusion to vulnerabilities associated with access to secure areas of airports and the tracking of maintenance for security-related technologies within airports. Most recently, the Inspector General released a report, Covert Testing of TSA's Passenger Screening Technologies and Processes at Airport Security Checkpoints. Details of this classified report was leaked this summer, and the Inspector General has given a briefing on the final report to this subcommittee. While I look forward to hearing the status of solutions that TSA and DHS are implementing to ensure that any security gaps associated with checkpoint screening and technologies are secure, I remain concerned that TSA will continue to purchase more technologies that address the threats of yesterday instead of the threats of tomorrow. Consequently, the Transportation Security Administration Reform and Improvement Act of 2015 A bill that recently passed the committee includes language that aims to aid in the development and innovative security technologies through a program that would create public and private sector partnerships to help businesses, particularly small businesses, to commercialize these innovative technologies. And while that amendment is designed to improve the technologies TSA uses, I still have concerns about some of TSA's other screening programs the Inspector General has found ineffective. For example, the Inspector General has found that TSA's Behavioral Detection Program, commonly referred to as SPOT, is a magnet for racial profiling, and TSA has little evidence that the program is an effective tool for screening passengers. We know that terrorists span all races and all ethnicities and have a profiling mechanism as a means of security is skeptical. Once again, I ask the administrator to review its efficiency of behavioral detection program. While the administrator appeared before the committee on July 1, I, along with many of my colleagues across the aisle, stated that we would give him appropriate time to address some of these glaring concerns at TSA. So, Mr. Administrator, we're glad to have you. I would assume the honeymoon is about over, and we can move forward. So I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a group of distinguished witnesses before us today, as I mentioned, to speak on this important topic, and they're no strangers to this subcommittee. Let me remind the witnesses that their entire written statements will appear in the record. Our first witness is the Honorable John Roth, who currently serves as Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security. Prior to his appointment as Inspector General, Mr. Roth served as a Director of the Office of Criminal Investigations at the Food and Drug Administration, was Chief of Staff to the Deputy Attorney General, and worked at the Narcotic and Dangerous Drugs section, which is the best section in all the Department of Justice. Am I right?
You're close, yes.
Because we both work there. So the chair now recognizes Mr. Roth to testify.
Good afternoon, Chairman Katko, Ranking Member Rice, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here to testify today. Throughout this year, I have testified before this subcommittee and others regarding TSA's ability to execute its important mission. I highlighted the challenges that TSA faced. I testified that these challenges were in almost every area of TSA's operations. Its problematic implementation of risk assessment rules, including its management of TSA PreCheck, failures in passenger and baggage screening operations, TSA's control over access to secure areas, including management of its Access Badge program, its management of the Workforce Integrity program, its oversight over acquisition and maintenance of screening equipment, and other issues that we have discovered in the course of over 115 audits and inspection reports. These issues were exacerbated, in my judgment, by a culture that developed over time, which resisted oversight and was unwilling to accept the need for change in the face of an evolving and serious threat. We have been writing reports highlighting some of these problems for years without an acknowledgement by TSA of the need to correct its deficiencies. However, we may be in a very different place now than we were then. I am hopeful that Administrator Neffinger brings with him a new attitude about oversight. Ensuring transportation safety is a massive and complex problem, and there is no single silver bullet to solve it. It will take a sustained and disciplined effort. The first step, however, in fixing this problem is having the courage to critically assess the deficiencies in an honest and objective light. Creating a culture of change within TSA and giving the TSA workforce the ability to identify and address risks will be the administrator's most critical and challenging task. I believe that the department and TSA leadership has begun that process of critical self-evaluation, and aided by the workforce at TSA, are in a position to address some of these issues. As you noted, we have just completed and distributed our report on our most recent round of covert testing of TSA's checkpoint operations. The results, while classified, were disappointing. Our testing was designed to check test point operations in real-world conditions. The failures included failures in technology, failures in TSA procedures, and human error. We found layers of security simply missing. But these results were not unexpected. we had conducted other covert testing in the past with similar results. TSA has put forward a plan consistent with our recommendation to improve checkpoint quality in 3 areas: technology, personnel, and procedures. This plan is appropriate because the checkpoint must be considered as a single system. The most effective technology is useless without the right personnel, and the personnel need to be guided by the appropriate procedures. Unless all 3 elements are operating efficiently, the checkpoint will not be effective. We will be monitoring TSA's efforts to increase the effectiveness of checkpoint operations and will continue to conduct covert testing. Consistent with our obligations under the Inspector General Act, we will report our results to this subcommittee as well as other committees of jurisdiction. While this audit focused on the checkpoint, effective checkpoint operations in and of themselves are not enough. We must also look at other areas to determine vulnerabilities. We have done considerable work on TSA's assessment of passenger risk and have registered our concern about TSA's use of managed inclusion and risk rules that were not based on an individual assessment of passenger risk. I am pleased to report that TSA has phased out its use of managed inclusion. However, we still have outstanding recommendations regarding the risk assessment rules that TSA continues to use. I urge the administrator to consider whether or not those risk rules are effective and ensure the safety of the transportation public. TSA also has the responsibility to oversee and regulate airport security provided by airport authorities. For example, in the case of airport worker vetting, TSA relies on airports to submit a complete and accurate aviation worker application data for vetting. In a recent audit, we found that TSA does not ensure that airports have a robust verification process for criminal history and authorization to work in the U.S., or sufficiently track the results of their review. TSA also did not have an adequate monitoring process in place to ensure that airport operators properly adjudicated applicants' criminal histories. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I welcome any questions that you or other members of the committee may have.
And those questions are indeed forthcoming, but before that, Mr. Roth, I want to thank you for your testimony. I appreciate being here, and I want to hear from our second witness, Administrator Neffinger, who I'm sure the honeymoon is indeed over. You were confirmed in June of 2015 as a 6th administrator of the TSA. You lead the security operations at more than 450 airports within the United States and a workforce of almost 60,000 employees. Prior to joining TSA, Administrator Neffinger served admirably as a 29th Vice Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard and the Coast Guard's Deputy Commandant for Operations. The Chair now recognizes Admiral Neffinger for his testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Katko, Ranking Member Rice, distinguished members of the subcommittee, and thank you for the opportunity to testify on my vision for answering these concerns and evolving the Transportation Security Administration. As you noted, Mr. Chairman, TSA was founded from crisis and has continued to evolve throughout its existence. Careful and sustained oversight by Congress and audits by the Inspector General and GAO are critical elements of this process, and I'm a strong supporter of such. I thank you for the support each of you has provided in exercising that oversight. I also want to thank Inspector General Roth for identifying areas for improvement in TSA. I met with him prior to my confirmation and met with him again during my first months as administrator to relay the seriousness with which I take his work. His team has been invaluable in helping us to identify the root causes of the recent covert testing results, and I thank him for his encouraging assessment of our new direction. That direction is a reflection of my vision on how we approach the continuing evolution of TSA. As you noted, I'm now 3 months into the job, and during that time, I've traveled to about 15 airports and numerous federal air marshal offices across the country. I've also visited our partners in the United Kingdom, France, and the Netherlands, and I've met with our stakeholders from the airlines, travel industry, and airport operators from major airports, including Los Angeles, Atlanta, Dallas, and Chicago. I've also been engaging with surface stakeholders in passenger rail and light rail, both here and in Europe. Throughout all of these visits, I've been thoroughly impressed with the professionals who occupy our ranks. I'm speaking specifically of our frontline transportation security officers. In addition to our air marshals, our inspectors, and other employees, each of whom swore an oath to serve their nation in a mission that encounters nearly 2 million travelers a day in the aviation sector alone. I've been impressed with the collaboration I've seen across the transportation enterprise, and I'm pleased with the range of capabilities our federal, state, and local partners bring to bear across every sector. These complex systems require that we systematically examine them and consider them as a whole, that we integrate this wide range of public and private capabilities, that we benchmark and apply best practices across the enterprise, and that we seek global consistency. I can assure you that as we move forward, we will remain an intelligence-driven, risk-based counterterrorism agency with a well-defined statement of mission, clear and unequivocal standards of performance, training and resourcing that enable the workforce to achieve success, and a relentless pursuit of excellence and accountability. We will conduct counterterrorism operations with discipline and competence. We will invest in deliberately developing our workforce, and we'll field advanced capabilities responsive to a pervasive and dynamic threat. We have a no-fail mission, one for which the consequences of a successful attack overwhelm the risk equation, and for which we must ensure we deliver mission success. My immediate priority is to pursue solutions to the recent covert testing failures, and I believe we're making significant progress in doing so. In response to the IG's findings, we have implemented an action plan to ensure leadership accountability, improve alarm resolution, increase effectiveness and deterrence, increase threat testing, and strengthen our procedures. We've also responded vigorously to Secretary Johnson's 10-point plan to review and assess screening operations, including training for the entire screening workforce, testing and improving the technology, and implementing these new procedures. We will continue to implement this plan of action and provide regular updates to you and to the Secretary. Of utmost concern is determining root causes for the failures noted. Our conclusion is that the screening effectiveness challenges were not merely a performance problem, nor were they a failure of the advanced imaging technology. Indeed, this technology has greatly enhanced our ability to detect threats, and it continues to perform to expected standards when deployed and used properly. Strong drivers of the problem, however, include leadership focus, environmental influences, and gaps in system design and processes, along with a disproportionate focus on efficiency and speed in screening operations rather than security and effectiveness. These powerfully influenced organizational culture and officer performance. As a result, there was significant pressure to clear passengers quickly at the risk of not diligently resolving alarms. Our analysis also revealed our officers did not fully understand the capabilities and limitations of the equipment, and several procedures were inadequate to resolve alarms. We have trained our officers to understand and use the equipment properly, and we've corrected our procedures. Solutions require a renewed focus on security, streamlined, effective procedures, investments in technology, and realistic, consistent, standardized training, along with a new balance between effectiveness and efficiency. And we must support our officers as they perform their duties. We'll continue to partner with our airlines and other members of the travel and airport industry to ensure that we can reduce stress on the checkpoint, and we will right-size and resource TSA appropriately. Our near-term solutions will halt further reductions in officer staffing to support our revised screening efforts, provide consistent, high-quality training at a centralized location, and enhance our technology. Our Mission Essentials training, conducted over the past 2 months with every frontline officer and leader across TSA, has helped reset our focus on security effectiveness, and most critically, has enhanced our officers' knowledge of the screening systems that they operate. I've heard repeatedly how valuable this information is to our officers, and I need to now extend that into our new hire training across the country. We need greater consistency and efficiency in its delivery, and we must do more to establish a professional foundation that's required of a high-performing counterterrorism organization. As such, I'm committed to expanding our existing TSA Academy at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center and plan to send all new hire TSOs to basic training beginning in January 2016. Centralized training in a formal professional academy ensures consistency and professionalism, produces greater enthusiasm, increased confidence in skills, and connectedness to a common agency culture and focus on mission. We must ensure the appropriate measures of effectiveness are in place to drive an institutional focus on our primary mission. We must employ a culture of operational evolution, one that constantly reassesses assumptions, plans, and processes. We're able to rapidly field new concepts of operation, and we must deliver an effective system and earn the confidence of the traveling public through competence, discipline, performance, and professionalism. We face a critical turning point in evolving TSA, both to address these recent findings and to begin our investment in a strategic approach to securing the transportation sector. As such, I'm committed to ensuring that we do so, that we employ multiple elements in intelligence-driven operations while discarding a one-size-fits-all approach, that we recruit and retain a highly trained workforce with accountability to high standards of performance. Chairman Katko, Ranking Member Rice, we have an incredible challenge ahead of us, but I know that TSA is up to the task. I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Administrator Neffinger. I called you Admiral or Administrator, either one. It's interchangeable, I guess. But thank you again for your testimony. I appreciate the fact that you are responding rapidly and recognizing and embracing the problems and trying to find solutions. And I'm encouraged by that. We all are. We look forward during the course of the questioning here today to talk about moving forward, what's the plan? And we hope you weave that into your testimony as we go through it today. I also thank you for rearranging your schedule to be here with us today. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to ask questions. And I'll start by observing the nature and tenor of this hearing and how it's different from the other ones that we've had. The other hearings we had so far, when we've had 7 subcommittee hearings, it's our 7th one, I believe, which is more than any in all of Homeland Security and perhaps more than most in Congress. The reason is because there's a lot to do and there's a lot of issues to examine. And at the forefront of those examining of those issues has been the Inspector General, and we appreciate that. Like was said earlier by Ms. Rice, I believe, or someone, more than 100 such reports have been done by the Inspector General since the inception of TSA. And those reports are revealing and also at times troubling. Since we got into the hearings this year, we did one on the Atlanta gun trafficking case, which exposed 170 guns being trafficked by employees through supposedly secure access points. And it exposed a major weakness in the airline's aviation system, that is employee access controls, which are sorely lacking. That was exacerbated by a number of cases recently in Dallas-Fort Worth and LAX and Oakland and elsewhere where major drug trafficking rings have been disrupted. And one of those rings at the preliminary hearing, one of the employees was bragging about the fact that he could bring anything through there, including a bomb, which is incredibly troubling. And instead of having an oh my God moment by the airports, we hear a lot of pushback about costs, and that's something we're going to have to examine going forward. We've had a hearing about screenings and there's problems with screenings and a 97% fail rate in recent tests. That's unbelievably troubling. We've had hearings about pre-check and managed inclusion and how people are getting pulled out of regular lines into the pre-check line without and any additional background checks, which defeats the purpose of pre-check. We've heard about the Federal Air Marshal Service, and we had a good, productive hearing with them, and then we found out that after that, Federal Air Marshals are filming sessions with prostitutes in hotels paid for with government credit cards, and Lord knows what else was going on. And that's troubling, too. And we've also heard some things about private screenings from the Inspector General. And this all points up that, I think, it underscores the belief by the Inspector General himself that sometimes, and it's not on your watch, Mr. Neffinger, but sometimes, many times, TSA has not responded. And that leads me to the conclusion that TSA, while a young agency, has become a very bureaucratized agency already, too slow to respond and not nimble enough to respond. And so the genesis of all that was why I had this hearing today, to allow us to discuss at a more general level what are some of the systemic problems that we see at TSA, and we're doing this in the benefit of Mr. Neffinger's presence so that he can hopefully address them going forward. So with that, teeing the ball up, Mr. Roth, I'd like to hear from you as to what you think some of the global problems are at TSA, and I encourage you to be as frank as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me preface my remarks by this is a look back over a number of different audit reports that span the course of years. And one of the conclusions or themes that I can draw from this is that there's a mismatch between the risk and meeting the risk. And that the sort of working theory that we have is either TSA doesn't understand the nature of the risk, or they do understand the nature of the risk, and then worse from that is that they don't address the risk in any appropriate way. And again, I'm going to be speaking in the past tense about this because I do think, or at least I'm hopeful, consistent with my auditor's vow of critical thinking and skepticism, but I am hopeful that we are in a new era. But I will talk about 3 episodes that to me sort of illustrate one of the big issues we have in sort of either not understanding the risk or simply dismissing the risk. The first is, of course, our covert testing. The recent round of covert testing was not a surprise to us, and it was not a surprise to TSA. We had been doing covert testing over the years with consistently disappointing results. And, you know, as we like to say, the best test of a football team is how they do on Sunday. To us, covert testing is the Sunday game. Real-world conditions, figure out exactly how well the system works, and it did not work very well. And what we found after the covert testing was even a little bit more upsetting, which was TSA does their own covert testing, and those results were very similar to our results. So none of this came as a surprise to TSA. One of the things that we discovered after this round of testing and I would say the very vigorous response that the department gave with regard to our briefing on the covert testing was that no one in DHS had known sort of this issue, that the issue had remained within TSA. TSA had not sort of elevated the issue, came as a surprise to the secretary, to the deputy secretary, to the leadership within the department. And when you look at TSA's fiscal 16 budget, 2016 budget, what it shows is that they're actually going to reduce the number of screeners. Their proposal was to reduce the number of screeners by about 1,700 people. Now, this is a budget that was developed over time and certainly not on this current administrator's watch, and I understand that it's going to be reversed. But I think it shows sort of a cultural attitude that they knew that they had a risk, and their response to that risk was reducing the number of screeners. And their justification for it, and I'm just reading from their budget document that was submitted to the Hill, was that TSA employs a multi-layered, risk-based, intelligence-driven approach to its security and counterterrorism mission, and as a result of these, they're focusing efforts on efficiency and can save money as a result of this, which is in direct contradiction to the evidence that they had at the time as to the efficiency of checkpoint operations. So they either dismissed the risk or understood the risk, but yet didn't meet the risk. So that would be the first episode, and if I could have, there's a couple others which I'm happy to continue, or?
Yeah, for a few moments, please.
Okay. The second one is our audit on pre-check. You know, we had real concerns about managed inclusion and pre-check. And as you know, you had a hearing on this. I had a conversation with the previous administrator about our audit report, where we had deep concerns that people that didn't have an individualized assessment of risk were getting expedited screening. And his answer was, well, look, it's my job to accept the risk, and I'm accepting this risk, which is fine, except my family flies. So, you know, I'm not sure that's an adequate answer. And that all these people went through secure flight. So the idea is, of course, that they've been vetted against certain intelligence databases to determine whether they are a risk. I mean, the problem with that is any student of modern terrorism history understands that 17 of the 19 9/11 hijackers were unknown to the intelligence community, and they wouldn't be on any sort of special list. The Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, was not on any special list. The Christmas Day bomber in 2009 was not on any list. The most significant terrorist attack we had in recent memory, the marathon bomber, Tamerlane Tsarnaev, wasn't on any list. In fact, he was looked at by the FBI and adjudged not to be a threat, and then not on any sort of active list. So this idea that, oh, well, it's an intelligence-based, and that's the silver bullet, and that's what's going to help us here, it's just a wrong-headed assessment of risk. And as I said, again, this was not on this administrator's watch, but it was very deeply upsetting to me during the course of our audits to see this kind of a reaction.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. I'll have some questions for you, the Admiral, on the second go-around, if we are able to get to that. If not, I'll ask you to submit the questions in writing, depending on our schedule here. The chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Rice, for any questions she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Inspector Roth, what I would like to ask you, you mentioned in your statement the number one thing that TSA can do is to change the culture, which is what you cite as significantly problematic. So what are your thoughts on how you change the culture?
It's a difficult problem because it's a problem that's grown up over time. One of the ways that you change the culture is, I think, what the administrator is currently doing, which is an honest look at what it is that's going on and sort of honestly confront your problems and put a plan of action in place. Historically, it has not been that. It has been, both for us and GAO, sort of a reaction, and a very disturbing reaction. For example, in our covert testing, I think from 2012, we had our results, and TSA pushed back considerably. on our methodology and on a number of other things. But lo and behold, they had their own internal testing that was almost the same. So what kind of an agency is sort of pushing back in public and yet understands that the audit is correct? As I said, I think this is changing, and there is an honest assessment of what's going on. My understanding is that the administrator is going to put forth a realistic strategic plan that isn't, everything is wonderful and we're doing fine and pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, but rather, this is a problem. The risks of catastrophic terrorism are real, and we absolutely need to get it right. So it's a long process. There isn't a single magic bullet, but certainly good leadership helps, and that's what we're hopeful for.
So, being one of 10 kids, I have to be optimistic, right? And I'm choosing to be optimistic about the ability to change the culture at TSA because it has only been around for a short period of time, right? And I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and I can tell you that that agency does the same exact thing. Every time there's an IG report that says, here's a problem, they push back and say, no, 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 there's no problem, nothing needs to be changed. The stakes are equally high for both our veterans, right, and national security, domestic and international, that TSA is dealing with. So I'm glad to hear you, Mr. Roth, speak so bluntly because that's what we need, that's what your job is. But I'm also happy to hear that you are optimistic about Admiral Neffinger because I am very optimistic about the new administrator for a whole host of reasons. So I just want to, one issue that I do want to address because you mentioned this, because I do believe, Mr. Roth, that in order to do an adequate assessment of your risk, right, intelligence has to be part of that. And one of the things that I was so distressed to hear about is how TSA is responsible for doing the checks on airport employees, and yet they're given incredibly poor information to do these background checks, which affects the ability to really adequately assess the risk of this employee, which, as the chairman pointed out, when you have gun runners and drug runners, some of whom are employed by the agency, that's problematic. So my question is to you, Mr. Admiral Neffinger, regarding that, because it seemed to me that that was a fix that didn't have to be a legislative fix. You, as the administrator, could say, from now on, if you want a background check to be done, which you have to have done, these are the things, these are the pieces of information that we need to get. Or you don't get the background check and you can't hire the person. So just that one area, if you could just address that one issue.
Yes, thank you. With respect to that, so I've got some good news to report. We actually get access to a whole host of information and databases now that allow us to do full, and we always had access to terrorist screening database and databases with known or suspected terrorist information in it. Some of what you're referring to are some categories within what's called the Terrorist Information Data Mart environment. It's just a big database where this was information that may or may not be sufficient to directly tie somebody to a known or suspected terrorist or identify them as such, or it might be partial information. And those were the categories that we had one by one or case by case access to, but not automated access. So we've asked for that automated access, and we're working through the interagency to achieve that. We've also dramatically improved our oversight of the airport vetting environment. So as you know, we still vet the folks who are applying for secure access badges, but to the Inspector General's point, we had not been overseeing the collection of information and the maintenance of the data and doing regular audits of that. We're doing that now, directly as a result of the Inspector General's findings. And so I think that we're moving forward in a good way on getting information. I share your concern that we have access to as much information as we need to have access to in order to fully vet people who we put into trusted environments, given what we've already known about what's happened in some of the airport environments across the country. I think that we've made good progress. I've met with my counterparts in the intelligence community, and I've met with the national security staff and the senior directors for Transborder and others to make clear my priorities, and so far I've been getting good results from that.
Great, thank you both very much.
Thank you, Ms. Rice. The chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of the Homeland Security Committee, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Neffinger, one of the real challenges I alluded to in my opening statement went toward the fact that we buy technology in the form of equipment for vulnerabilities that they can't detect. How are you going to close that gap between known vulnerabilities and acquiring equipment and technologies that won't detect it?
Well, you know, Mr. Thompson, you've really hit on a key concern, and that is how do you get beyond today's security systems and look towards the future and evolve fast enough to meet what we know to be an evolving threat environment. I think there's a couple of things we need to do. First of all, I'd like to see more robust competition in the marketplace. Right now, we're tied to a couple key vendors. They've done good work and they've produced some good equipment for us, but I'd like to see even more competition. I'd like to incentivize more. I think there's a lot of creativity in the private sector, and I think there's a lot of innovation in the private sector. And I've got some thoughts on ways in which we can incentivize that competition to include small business competition, because I think that some of the small businesses out there are doing some of the most innovative work that we have. The second piece is to have a clear understanding of what the threat is, so that when we develop the requirements that we need for the equipment that we're looking for, that those requirements are expansive and robust. That we don't just look to buy the next thing on the shelf that looks like it might do the job, but that you've got to really start. I'll back up a moment because it speaks to some of the points that each of you have made with respect to focus on mission. You really have to start with the mission. And it's not just enough to say my mission is security. You have to say, well, what does that mean? What are the components of my missions? You have to do a true analysis of the mission. And I say this sincerely. I start every day by thinking about the mission, and I work backwards from there. And I think, what does it take to accomplish this mission? What are the requirements we need to, if you're sitting at a checkpoint, what does that checkpoint have to actually do? What's the nature of the threats that might present themselves at the checkpoint? How might you determine those threats? How might they be presented? In what manner can they be presented? And all the different variations of that. That's a very complex process to do that, but you have to do it, and you've got to dissect that mission down to the details. And then you can begin to put out requirements that I think we'll see much more robust response to that. In the meantime, I want to make sure that the equipment that we currently operate is operating to its peak. And so we're working to get the most out of the current equipment as we look to move the next technology.
Well, and not for a response, but if we keep buying current equipment that can't identify those known vulnerabilities, we're not where we need to be. And I think this robust competition is healthy, because when you only have 3 major players in the area, you know, that's a lot. So I look forward to your leadership to incentivize other competition. I think that's important. We put it in the legislation, and I hope that authority gets us where we need to be. A couple other things. You talked about the checkpoints. You know, TSOs are special to a lot of the traveling public. Most of the time, that's all people see, are those men and women at the checkpoints. I would like to make sure that those men and women are being encouraged to be the best that they can be and not penalized. Now, I heard something yesterday, and I just need a yes or no answer. Are the medical guidelines for TSOs and all other employees for TSA the same?
I don't know the answer to that question exactly, because I'm looking at the very medical guidelines right now. I know that they've over the past year, before I became confirmed, I know that we've been working on updating the standards for medical guidelines. Here's what I believe to be the case. that I think that there are different categories of medical guidelines depending upon the type of work that you have to do in the organization. For example, I believe that there's certain physical standards you have to be able to meet in order to perform the duties as a baggage check person that may or may not be the same standards that you have to hold if you're an employee at TSA headquarters.
I want you to check that out.
But I will verify that for you.
I'm told that like people who are TSOs who might have asthma get discharged for having asthma or high blood pressure, diabetes, whatever, but that people in management somehow don't. And I have the information, but that's a problem from my vantage point, because if you have a different issue, look at that
I will do that.
and help. And I got some other questions that I'll submit, Mr. Chairman, for the record to get it. But I'd also like unanimous consent to provide for the record that there have been 165 TSOs who've been terminated for disqualifying medical conditions and cancer. I mean, you know, why are you going to terminate somebody because they have cancer? I mean, that's, you know what I'm saying? So I don't want us to be a Scrooge. I want us to treat people humanely. And I'd like to include that in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. The chair now will recognize other members of the committee for questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. In accordance with our committee rules and practice, I plan to recognize members who are present at the start of the hearing by seniority on the subcommittee. Those coming in later will be recognized in the order of arrival. The chair now recognizes Mr. Keating from Massachusetts for 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was only me anyways.
Well, you're very important to all of us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here, Mr. Roth, Inspector General Roth. And thank you for your work. You're talking about a culture. Let me just do this again. You know, it's not just TSA administrator that we're talking about in terms of the culture. It's higher up. Secretary Ridge, when he was a witness, I brought this up with him, and he agreed it was a major issue. Secretary Napolitano, when she was the secretary, several times said this is a priority, it's an issue. I brought it up with Secretary Johnson, and last summer I brought it up with you. And you agreed that this was a top priority. And that's the issue of perimeter security around airports. I've been saying this for so long, and the response has been to cut down the number of vulnerability studies and to tell this committee that things are more secure. In the meantime, teenagers, intoxicated people are breaching perimeter security, going right up to the aircraft, which is I hate to say this publicly, but which is an amazing target. They can put a bomb on there the same way that these teenagers had access and not even risk their own lives, the way people would ordinarily have to do if they're going to breach the gate. So I wanted to follow up, number one, with that question to see what steps have been taken since we last discussed this and what you expect to implement. The second issue, part of the problem with perimeter is the jurisdictional issue. You've got some airports that are municipal airports, very small airports, but still networked into the big commercial flights. You've got authorities, all kinds of brands and shapes, all types of resources to deal with it. And the continuing problem of what to do with the exit lanes, which TSA maintains is still a priority, it's still important, it's still an access point, but you want to shift that authority to these airports that aren't even doing the job with perimeter security. So the two questions I have is, what's the update on perimeter security in terms of implementing what you said was a high priority? Number two, how can we resolve the exit lane issue, which I think, if it's so important for TSA, that should remain their responsibility to make sure we have the kind of security we need there, because that's a vulnerability standpoint as far as I've seen. If you could, those two questions, Administrator Neffinger, and thank you again for making yourself so available.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Keating. With perimeter security, as you know, one of the things that was requested right in the aftermath of the Atlanta issue was a look by the Aviation Security Advisory Committee at vulnerabilities across the airport system. I think that provided a very good series of issues to address, as well as some strong recommendations, and we've been working to, first of all, to think about how to implement those, and then to take a good solid look at the system. So it actually is a significant priority of ours to ensure perimeter security. I share your same concerns with it. So what have we done? I've ordered a look at all the airports across the country. I want to know from top to bottom, what have we done with respect to perimeter security, including access control points, how those access control points are maintained, and then what do we do to actually ensure the safety and security of the perimeter itself? What's the nature of the perimeter, and how consistently is it enforced around? So that's a fairly large undertaking, and I haven't seen the results of that request yet. The other thing I'm doing is putting more effort into that oversight piece. We have legislative authority to do that oversight, whether you're dealing with a local airport authority, a local municipality, or a large aviation concern. All of it falls under the purview, and I think that you can set clear performance standards for how that's done. So the first is to assess what the current state really is, as opposed to.
I don't want to interrupt you, but my time is going way on me. Do you have a time frame in which that study could be taking place? I'm a few weeks away from asking this question for 6 years now. Do you have a time frame?
Well, I understand your frustration. So it's undergoing. We're doing that right now. Let me get you an actual time frame so that because I don't want to promise something that I can't deliver on a certain time. But what I can commit to you is that it's happening right now. That I've asked the same question. I'm very concerned about the same issue. I want to understand, because that system is important. Let's say you get the checkpoint 100% right. There's more vulnerabilities in the aviation system than the checkpoint.
And the exit lane, briefly, if you could.
Yeah, and I'll get back to you on the exit lane question as well, sir.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. We are getting ready for votes, but I think what I'd like to do is, if any of the other members have questions, we just ask questions and have you respond to the rest in writing. I have a few that I'd like to have responded to in writing before we wrap up here. And with respect to Mr. Roth, simply, Mr. Roth, if there's other kind of 30,000-foot observations you'd like to make about TSA that you weren't able to cover today in this short period that we were here, I encourage you to submit them in writing to the committee, and I encourage you to be as blunt and as open as possible. I think it's important to expose that and make sure you copy the administrator on it as well. And with respect to Administrator Neffinger, there's a couple of things I'd like to have you talk about. Our ranking member Thompson hit it right on the head with the technology issues. One of the things he said that's very important is he said that seems to be only 3 major players, if you will, within the technology providing for the administration, and sometimes it seems like there's a sense of comfort with dealing with just those 3. And I think competition is a good thing. And I've been to many technology presentations recently, and the updated technology out there is stunningly advanced. And it seems to me that I'd like to hear from you actually as to what you're doing to vet that technology and how you're encouraging these newcomers on the scene to give them a fair shake and take not only the competition aspect, but taking a really good hard look at everything from the pre-screening aspects with the biometric data to the actual physical screening procedures and machines, because we know there's problems with them now, and going forward, how you're going to address that. The other component I want to ask you about is the age of the screening equipment itself, because from my understanding is much of this equipment is at or near a 10-year lifespan, and that I'd like to know what the plans are going forward to replace it, because many of these are at the end of their lifespan and projected lifespan at least, and it doesn't seem like there's a plan going forward on the horizon. So I'd like to see what the blueprint is going forward to deal with this new technology. And I think Mr. Thompson's 100% right that technology is critically important in hearing from all parties, not just the ones that TSA is comfortable with. That's very important. I want to make sure there's nothing else here. Oh yeah, last thing is with respect to the access controls, I'd like to hear what's been done since we've to tighten up access controls. And I'll note to just warn you that with respect to the Viper team, that was vaunted as, or that was celebrated as a risk-based security for the access controls, but it was completely exploited by the individuals in Dallas-Fort Worth case. As a matter of fact, employees went into areas, and if the Viper team was there, they just simply called out to their comrades to bring the drugs and contraband through another exit, another entry point, and that's a major concern. So I don't want to hear too much about the Viper teams because they're not getting the job done. It's pretty obvious. They're a good idea, but they're easily circumvented. So I'd like to hear what your ideas are about that going forward and what's actually been done going forward. And I really look forward to getting that bill passed that we just recently passed out of the House and getting it signed, passed out of the Senate and signed by the President so that we can get to work on doing the in-depth study that's really needed with this. So with that, I'll ask my colleagues if they have any further questions they want to have submitted for the record. Anything? Okay. All right, if there's any further ones, we'll submit them to you in writing within 10 days. And I thank you very much. It's an abbreviated session, but we've had a few things going on today, as you might imagine. And it's now time for some votes. So thank you very much.